we all know, about 15 months ago, Typhoon Yolanda crossed Samar and then crossed Leyte, with the eye of the storm directly impacting Tacloban. As you can see, parts of Tacloban were pretty much wiped off the map. 90% of the city's infrastructure was completely destroyed. 4 million people were displaced altogether by the typhoon, and over 6,000 people died. And I've been told that in Tacloban alone, over 600 of them were babies and children. So this is where disaster risk reduction can come in. I'm not sure if it's because I arrived in Tacloban coming up to the 1-year anniversary, or whether I was walking around in my Red Cross t-shirt and we're all about the people and the humanitarian side of things. But my first month there, I was overwhelmed by all these personal stories I was hearing. So dozens and dozens of people opening up to me and telling me exactly what happened, who they lost and how. And what then occurred to me was that the 7,000 people that died actually didn't really need to die. People in this area, as we know, are really used to having typhoons come, and really big typhoons, but not on this scale. So when Yolanda was heading for them, they did what they always do, which was take shelter in their homes. As you can see, a lot of Tacloban is coastal, and it's the second poorest province in the Philippines. So the people living along the coast are often the fishermen and the really vulnerable people, and they don't live in solid structures. So they basically didn't know that storm surge was a risk. So they really didn't stand a chance when the typhoon came. So this is where disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation really can make a big difference. When I talk about DRR, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, and it should. So it covers all different levels of government, NGOs, the corporate sector, communities, and individuals. In this context, and with Red Cross, as we're about the people side of things and the humanitarian side, it's the softer side of that. So I'm essentially talking about communities being prepared. So as Amy briefly said, 4 of us arrived to work with Philippines Red Cross in disaster recovery roles. So I'm in Tacloban, and then we have Gabrielle in Bogo, in northern Cebu, and Amy in Rojas, and Rachel up in Coron. So lucky Rachel. Our roles were quite broad, and up to us with our different skill sets to kind of create once we got there. So I have a background in community preparedness. I initially was placed with the high-end operations team, but then quite evidently it seemed to make sense for me to be based with the local chapter. So the local chapter will be there on an ongoing basis, and the high-end team have just come in to support the chapter. So transferring my skills is more sustainable if I base myself there. And I have a fantastic counterpart called Jason, who is a very good DRR facilitator. The flagship program for Philippines Red Cross, one of them, is the RC143 program, and it's about having volunteers trained at the barangay level in an array of areas that Red Cross work in. So that includes disaster risk reduction, as well as first aid, blood, international humanitarian law, and the tracing service. So Jason's basically been told to implement RC143 across Leyte and Samar in every barangay. So they need 43 members and 1 team leader. So that's kind of a big ask. And he's a fantastic facilitator, but at the moment there's no kind of planning or structure about how he'll do it, how he'll prioritise the communities that he works with and the barangays, how they'll monitor it, what happens after that. And then on the other hand, you've got the high-end operation working in all different sectors like shelter, Watsan, and DRR is one of the areas that they're needing to do work in. So the assignment that kind of almost came to the surface and became the obvious thing to do was to work with Jason and integrate the DRR activities we're doing with the same beneficiaries as the high-end operation. I'm just going to show you a quick video of my counterpart Jason talking about what community preparedness and the DRR process means to him and the communities that he works with.
What's the difference between hazard and disaster, because that is the most very important part that they want to know, because that was happened during the Yolanda, because they don't understand what really is storm surge, what kind of event will happen in Yolanda's time. So people might want to know how vulnerable they are if they are going to face this kind of disaster in the future. And so that's the primary question: when and where. Well, where we are going, where the places that is safe, when we are going to act on there's an pending storm, or there's a threat of earthquakes and other disaster. So through disaster risk reduction, we educate them and teach them in mapping and identifying the problems in the community. We let the people, the community, to identify the problem in their community on how they are going to find a solution for the problem they are facing.
So that backdrop behind him is Anibong, which is one of the main areas where the storm surge came and basically scooped away all the barangays there. So that level of DRR, it's not really rocket science. The way Red Cross does it is we use the vulnerability capacity assessments. So it's a real participatory approach. It's Red Cross playing a facilitation role, and the communities go through a process of identifying what their hazards are. You can see in this picture, they're doing a hazard map. So they literally draw their barangay, and then we overlay it with plastic, and they map out where flood levels might go, storm surge, mudslides, and you can see from that one, almost the entire area is red, so that's kind of the high risk area. And these people have had, flood after flood after typhoon after flood. So there's 7 different tools we use, and at the end they've got their risks, they've prioritised them and ranked them, they've mapped them, and they've come up with an action plan. And we do it over 2 days. So to me, that work plan sounded fantastic in theory. We're doing DRR, the high-end team need DRR. This is kind of the reality of how I've tried to make sense of what I've done in my first half of my assignment. So this week marks the exact halfway of our 9-month assignment. And it was a very interesting process to sit back and reflect on what has been going on. So like I said, I arrived 1 month before the 1-year anniversary. So everyone, like the staff and volunteers that have been working on this operation are incredible and very, very dedicated. They seemed very stressed out and kind of burnt out and hadn't had a break, but there was no convincing them to take a break. With my Australian Red Cross hat on, I was just like, they need kind of support, they need debriefing, they need psychological first aid, but it was just go, go, go. And with the 1-year anniversary, they had extra pressure to have X number of shelters built or this kind of project finishing. And they also were organising a very big program of activities for the anniversary, and the chairman was coming, which always comes with its own challenges. So we had balloon releasing ceremonies, we had a torch run that started at the same time through the night that the storm surge started and followed the path of the storm surge. We had Zumba classes, we had karaoke, we had sports fest activities for the volunteers. And this is a RC 143 orientation with over 1,000 participants. Looks slightly like a cult. In Australia, we'd be lucky and happy if we had 12 people at our community preparedness sessions, so it's really a different scale here. Following the 1-year anniversary, the first typhoon of the season, I believe, that was impacting our area was Typhoon Queenie. And that's a photo of me sleeping at work with the Red Cross action team getting ready to respond. And luckily we didn't need to respond too much in that one, but I did learn how to make chicken adobo that night. Following Queenie was Typhoon Ruby, which we all know about, and unfortunately wasn't such a positive story for Leyte and Summer. So that photo shows some of the communities just in northern Leyte, so this is the first municipality next to Kalayaan city. The success of that story, I guess, was the early evacuation and the massive evacuation we saw. So one of the biggest peacetime evacuations, including, I think, 20 of us. But really, a lot of the same areas were very, very badly impacted. And I couldn't find current numbers, but I think over 6,000 homes totally destroyed, and many of them people that had just managed to get their livelihoods back and rebuild their house. It's now kind of gone. Ruby also meant that a lot of the staff and volunteers didn't have their Christmas holidays, which stressed me out to no end because I was actually back in Australia for a lot of this. So I just kept thinking about the volunteers that were not going to have that break that they so desperately needed. But all the festivities that came with Christmas, again, was another kind of event. The next photo I took flying in from Manila to Leyte, and that's the effects of Typhoon Seniang. So that just brought a huge amount of water, essentially, and there wasn't really anywhere for the water to go after the previous events. So I think 58 people died in that typhoon, and on Leyte in summer, 29 of them died in mudslides. And it was the young volunteers based at the Leyte chapter where I am that were out there, like, putting the bodies out of the mudslides while I was coming back from my Christmas holiday. So we were providing humanitarian relief in all of that kind of over Christmas. And I guess as Ruby was happening, probably about 6 weeks before I got back from Christmas, the chapter was told that they had to recruit over 500 volunteers to act as first aid carriers for the Pope's visit. I was trying to tell them that, I didn't think that was possible. It was, not a realistic ask, but they did it. And this is no paid staff either. This is just all volunteers recruiting and training 500 people to help support the Pope, and they thought that was a privilege to be involved in, and that was another quite inspiring thing to see. So the Pope then came, and with him he brought Typhoon Anam. Which fortunately, to me again, I was like, oh no, this is terrible, I can't believe it's happening, this city just loves the attention of such a drama queen. But people just got on with it. They don't even kind of analyse what's happening or think this is terrible or why us, they just get on with it. So I've tried to kind of adopt that approach. So after the Pope left, suddenly everyone's kind of turning around and going, right, we're ready for DRR, what are we doing? What is DRR and what are we doing about it? And I think, so one of the challenges is DRR is all about kind of planning in advance for something that's going to happen. Like in the Philippines instance, it's going to happen. In Australia, it's more, people think it might happen, so it's harder to imagine. But here, it's all about pre-planning. And I think a lot of the culture in the Philippines is about just being present and being in the moment, but facing what you have to face and deal with day to day. And when you're having to deal with this much, the last thing on your mind is kind of pre-planning. The other struggle with DRR can be if people don't have shelter or have their basic needs, they're not actually coming to us and asking for DRR. So we're trying to push something onto communities that they may not think they're ready for or they're not asking for. It's also hard to measure DRR. It's not like giving money and resources over and going, fantastic, we've got a whole new community of houses. So because it's not tangible, it's often not invested in as much. And I should say at this point, obviously while all this is going on, I was building up a good relationship with my counterpart Jason, but also just sitting there going, this is beeping, unbelievable, I can't believe all of this stuff is happening. But it was a good time to kind of make sense of the Red Cross operation and what we were doing there. So being in Tacloban, it's been fascinating literally watching a city be rebuilt from the ground up around me, and also being there to experience the first typhoon season since Kalayaan. I've been totally amazed by the resilience of the local people there and also just their acceptance of what life throws at them. At times I've felt totally overwhelmed and actually quite sad about what's happening, but it's the locals that then are there kind of reassuring me, saying, oh, we'll be okay, we'll be okay. So it feels a bit wrong, but they're just, they're very resilient and accepting of their situation in life. It also feels like everything I've ever kind of read or heard about climate change, this is like a small kind of case study microcosm of climate change. So yes, disasters are happening more frequently, and with Tacloban's population growth and urbanisation and the poor communities on the coast, more and more people are being affected by those disasters. So it's an area I'm really passionate about. I would say, from my experience probably in Australia and here, it doesn't feel like a good news story yet, but I think that's another reason that AVID Program should keep investing in DRR and sending volunteers into the space to help build the capacity and maybe bring some of the planning and structure around it. So next time we can start doing DRR a bit earlier, people might feel more confident with what exactly it means. So there's no such thing as a natural disaster, only natural hazards. So the hazards are the typhoons and the earthquakes and everything else that the Philippines gets thrown at it, but the fact that we have people like such entrenched poverty and people living on the coast in vulnerable areas like this, that's when it becomes a disaster. So I think if we go back to the 7,000 lives that were lost in Yolanda with good DR, that wouldn't have been, it didn't have to happen. So to me, I think that's a really strong call to action to keep doing DR and keep sending volunteers into that space.